What's up everybody, my name is Yadlovski, and on my channel I talk about photography, Photoshop, Lightroom, and even a little bit of video and video editing. If you're new to my channel, thanks for stopping by. In this video, I wanted to talk about real estate photography. I wanted to share a few tips about real estate photography, and I also wanted to show you how I take several exposures of a room and blend them together. So let's get into it, and I'll give you some tips as we go along. So as I'm setting up for this shot of this dining room, I want to keep a few things in mind. So first, I want to have my ISO around 200. I typically use 200 so my shutter speeds don't get too slow, but ideally, you could use the lowest ISO that you could. But in this case, I'm using ISO 200. For our ambient exposure, I'm going to use aperture priority mode, and I'm going to let the camera decide, what the exposure of the room is. And then I'm going to see how that looks and kind of go from there and decide whether I need to make it brighter or darker and see how the image comes out. And then after I get my ambient exposure, I'm going to go ahead and take an exposure of the room using my flash, which will help fill in the shadows. And then I will go in post-production and blend those two images together, which is really quick and pretty easy and actually comes out really good. So let's get to the camera and start to take a look here. Okay, so I have my Canon 60D here with a 10 to 22 millimeter. That's primarily the camera that I use for all my real estate photography. I do have a 5D Mark IV and a 2470 on that now that I'm filming with, but usually I'll use my Canon 60D for real estate photography since I have a wide angle lens for it. So the first thing I want to do is get my camera set up on the tripod. And one of the questions I had when I first got started was, how high do I set my camera? So here you can see I'm 5'10", so I have it, around the middle of my torso. This is maybe about, 4 feet or so high. And that's about where I set my camera. So got my tripod set up, got my camera on there. Next, I'll make sure my ISO is, in this case, I wanted to use 200, so I'm gonna go with 200. One thing I really like about the Canon 60D is that it's got this flip out screen, which is great because then I don't have to try and duck in the back and see the screen, especially if you're in the corner of a room and I don't have an opening like I do here. So I'm going to open up my screen. I'm going to make sure I use that. The next thing I want to do is I typically use a remote control. Typically use a remote control for my shutter speed. To make my shutter go, to take the picture. I use a remote. This way I don't have to touch the camera and I don't introduce any kind of shake to the camera. So I set my camera to take pictures on a 2-second timer, and that seems to work out pretty good. So I'm going to come back here. I have my f-stop set at f11, and depending on the room, I may take that up to as high as f16 if I wanted to get just a little bit of a starburst in some of the lights. But in this case, I'm going to use f11. I think anywhere from f8 to f11 is usually pretty good, especially considering you're using a wide-angle lens anyway. So here I've got it at f11. I'm in aperture priority mode, and I'm going to take a look at my screen here, line up my shot. I'm going to focus on something that's maybe in the middle, and here, in this case, about the corner of the table over here. I'm going to focus on that. Focus here, and then I'm going to use my remote control to start the shutter or the timer. Okay, so when I look at that image, I'll pop it up on the screen here. You can see it's a little bit dark, so I might adjust the exposure compensation, and I might just go up a stop and just see how that picture comes out. So I'm going to go up 1 stop, take another picture here. Okay, and that looks a little bit better. I kind of want it to be kind of bright. I don't want it to be too dark. Usually what I do is I'll take a couple exposures. A lot of times I'll even just create a series of bracketed images, so it just does it right in a row. 2 stops under, equally exposed at 0, and then 2 stops overexposed. So a lot of times I do that. In this case, I'm not. I'm just trying a few different settings, but either way it can work. So that looks pretty good. I'll pop that image up on the screen, and then I'm just going to do one at 2 stops over exposed on the exposure compensation, and I'll take that picture. Okay, so that's looking a little bit brighter. So now I'm ready for my flash exposure. I want to make sure that if I have any windows in the room, I don't want them to be blown out. I want to be able to see a little bit of detail in or outside from outside the window. So the first thing I'm going to do is In this case, on my LCD here, on my 60D, I can actually take the point where I want the camera to tell me the exposure. So I'm going to put it over the window, and I'm going to dial it in until I see that my exposure is 2 stops underexposed. And then I'm going to let the flash do the work of lighting everything up in here. So in this case, it looks like if I'm around 1/40th of a second, that might work pretty good. So I've turned on my flash. I'm at f11. My ISO is at 200, and I'm at 1/40th of a second. So I'm going to take this picture and see how this looks. So again, I'm going to use my remote, take the picture. Okay, not too bad. Now, one thing to keep in mind with the flash, I generally point it straight up towards the ceiling or just back into the corner, because we want this light to flood into the room and kind of fill the surfaces that are a little bit dark in our ambient images. So I'm going to go ahead and just dial it up again. So that was about -2 on my exposure when I look at the meter on my camera. So now I'm going to take an image where it's -1 on my exposure and just see how that looks. So I'm going to slow my shutter speed down to 1/20th of a second. I'm going to go down 1 stop to get a little extra light and a little extra ambient light into the image. So go ahead and take that picture. Okay, that's starting to look better. Now, when you look at just the flash image by itself, it kind of looks not so great. But when we combine that with the ambient image in Photoshop, it's going to look great, and you're going to be able to see detail in all the different areas of the image. Okay, so I think we have enough images and what we need for this room. So I'm going to take these images back to the computer. We'll check it out. We'll look at them in Lightroom, probably make a few minor adjustments, and then bring them over into Photoshop, and I'll show you what the final product looks like. All right, guys, so here we are over in Lightroom. We're going to take a look at the couple of images that we took of the dining room. And here we'll start with the ambient image. So here I have the ambient image as it came out of the camera. We're looking here, we have it pretty bright. The windows are a little blown out. So this is straight out of the camera, and there are a few changes that I would make here in Lightroom before bringing it over to Photoshop to combine it with the flash image. So I have a preset that I would use, and once I apply that preset, this is what that image will look like. It kind of flattens it out a little bit, brightens everything up. The next image that we took was the flash image, and this is what it looked like straight out of the camera. It did look a little dark, but here you can see we retained some information of what was going on outside the windows. And again, I have a preset for my flash exposures for real estate photography that I would apply. And once I apply that, I would get an image that looked kind of like this. Now I would bring both these images at this point over into Photoshop. Again, I'll link to a video where I show you how to combine an ambient image and a flash image in Photoshop. I'll link to that. And but I would bring these over there. I would blend them together using the technique that you'll see in the other video. And then when I'm done, I would bring the photo back into Lightroom. And here's the final image that I would have. Now, once I get back into Lightroom, I actually do go through and do some of the transformations, the auto uprights and stuff, to make sure everything looks good, and you got your verticals are vertical and all that kind of stuff. So this would be the final image that I would get after blending the two images together, the ambient image and the flash image. So if you want to see exactly how to blend the two images together and take them from Lightroom into Photoshop and blend the two images together, the ambient exposure plus the flash exposure, I've already created a video on my YouTube channel that shows you how to do that. So I'll link to that video in the description below. I'll try to put a card up here for that so you can click on it and it'll take you over to that video. So if you like this video and it helped you out a little bit, give it a thumbs up. If you're into photography, Photoshop, Lightroom, and even a little bit of video and video editing, consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.